the real thing that goes beast mode with Blender is that it's a 3D software. So all that you're doing here in this drawing or editing in the 2D dimension, you can actually start to take that into 3D space. So for example, this stroke, it's lined up on 2D, but if I press Shift D to duplicate it, I can actually now rotate this around in 3D space and start to do some interesting things. You can do interesting things with the camera as well in 3D space. So if I go into object mode and I select the camera, now you can move your camera around. So if I'm going to press G and Y, I can move it on the Y axis, and you can do your zooms like this, and you just keyframe it over here. And then another useful tool that I find for positioning camera, so you press 0 on your numpad to go in and out of camera view. If you go to view on this panel, so this panel, if you press N, pops in and out. And if you go to view over here and you go camera to view, now when you hold middle mouse button and look around, then you can position your camera. You can look around with your camera. Obviously when you uncheck it and you use middle mouse button, then you escape the camera and you need to press 0 on your numpad to get back in to the camera view. And yeah, obviously if you want to reset your camera, then you can just click and drag over this and you can press 0 and it'll zero out your camera and such. I'm starting to really mess around a bit here. I think the camera was, it was at some angle somewhere. But and another really powerful feature of Blender's Grease Pencil is it has, wrong function here. So it has modifiers that you can enable on the Grease Pencil object itself. So if you select your specific stroke, there's this modifiers tab over here. This is where you can add some different kinds of modifiers. Your mirror, dot dash allows you to turn your line into dashes and you can animate it. And in addition to modifiers, you can also add effects. Now effects are unique to Grease Pencil, whereas the modifiers, you can add them to 3D geometry as well. But effects are a couple of different things: blur, glow, pixelate, shadow, swirl, wave distortion. So these are all like procedural manipulation of the vertices in your artwork. So in order to actually see them, you need to be in your rendered mode over here. Yeah, they won't show up. So you can see this wave modifier is like making the lines wavy over here. And yeah, they won't get rendered when you're in the viewport shading mode. And then these you can really start to play around with, the like different functionalities. And you can animate them as well. So you can press this little dot to the left of the input field, and that sets a keyframe. And then if I go back to one over here, and I press it again, and I put it to 0, and I make sure it's yellow. If it's yellow, it means there's a keyframe on it. If it's green, it means it's interpolating. And if it's orange, it means you've changed the value, but it hasn't keyed that value. So you need to make sure it's yellow if you want to have it as a key. So yeah, now, our camera's animating as well and such. So, but yeah, you can see you can start going crazy with these effects as well. And yeah, no, the modifiers also have some pretty unique stuff. I think one of the coolest ones is, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start fresh here because I've fudged up this camera. One of the coolest modifiers you can use is this line art modifier. And this is useful for if you have a shot in a background and there's a background and the background is quite complex. What you can do is, if you go into object mode, you can bring in 3D objects by pressing Shift A, or just by going Add Mesh and a cube, and you can start bringing in all sorts of 3D objects, and we can edit this object. We can just duplicating it a bunch by pressing Shift D. But yeah, let's say this is your background and it's a bunch of buildings. What you can do with this line art modifier is you can select an object and you use this to input the object, and that's the cube that we brought in. And then you select a layer of your grease pencil stroke, so we can use the lines layer, and select a material, so we can just use that solid stroke. And it generates a sort of toon shader line art for these 3D objects. And it's based on the camera view. So as you can see here, there's no line art being generated on this edge or on this edge because it's outside of the camera and it won't get rendered in your animation. And yeah, so what you can do is you can use this to then effectively create 3D backgrounds and such, especially if you're having a moving camera, so you know that objects like cars and such in animation are difficult to maintain volume if you're just doing traditional frame by frame. And this is where the sort of 2D, 3D integrated workflow really starts to shine, because if I press Shift A and I'm going to just put in a new grease pencil stroke, so strokes can be used to separate different things you're doing with grease pencil, and they're separate objects, so you can switch them off to be rendered or not. So if you're starting to get more complex in what you're doing, then you can create multiple strokes as a additional layering method in addition to having multiple layers here.
I think you would use strokes if you're doing like one character, or would you do like all your characters in the same stroke?
Yeah, you can use 2 different strokes to do 2 different characters, because then it's easier to also have your keyframes for each of those characters separated, because the stroke contains all the keyframes and such. Yeah. So if I'm in draw mode in my new stroke, this is another powerful aspect of the Blender Grease Pencil, is you can choose where the layer where in 3D space you're drawing onto. By default, it's origin, so you're just going to be drawing at 0, 0 in the world space. So if I'm doing my drawing here, you can see it's happening right in the middle of world space, at the middle of the axes here. But you can choose surface. So if you're doing a 3D, 2D integrated workflow, now what's going to happen is I can draw anywhere on 3D objects and it'll be in the surface of those objects. So if I want to do some maybe I'm doing like a house, and I can do the windows and I can actually draw details and textures and such onto the 3D objects to make it look more like integrated into your 2D style. And you'll see there's a bit of a gap, and how you adjust that gap is this offset over here. So you set this before you start drawing in surface, and so I've got a 0.15 offset, and the offset exists because if I just put the offset to 0 and I draw, it draws right on the surface, and then it can start clipping through the surface. So half of the stroke is in and half is out. So generally you'd want to have some kind of a, like a 0, even like a 0.05 or something. Just helps your line look better at different angles. You can see here, so it's like just above the surface there. But yeah, you can draw on other strokes as well, and do some interesting things here. This is the plane that you draw in. So if you're drawing on the surface, but you've got front selected, and I draw over here, it's doing the right thing. So Yeah, that's good. So this this thing more comes into play if I'm drawing on the origin or the 3D cursor. So now if I'm drawing on the origin in front, and then I switch to top and I draw again, now it's, yeah, it's being blocked over here, but it'll draw it like vertically. Yeah. Yeah, it's gotten yeeted somewhere. But yeah, again, that's sort of more advanced workflow. But yeah, I tend to find drawing from view is what I use the most, but front is also reliable because you get set up with the default view at the front. Just drawing from view allows you to, if I start moving my camera around, it'll always just be facing the camera, as if you're drawing, as if there's a camera plane that you're drawing on. But yeah, that's sort of all the fundamental cool things about Grease Pencil that I can think to mention. Obviously, you've got all your vector art tools here that you can use as well, as though you're using like Adobe Illustrator and such. But yeah, there's the crash course. I'm gonna stop my recording.